Hi, Andrew. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
All right. Could you provide a quick history of how you came to become a successful novelist?
Well, it wasn't something I anticipated. I always loved to write. Since I was a little kid, I was always, as soon as I could actually learn to physically write, I was always writing in the air obsessively, and it would drive my mother crazy. I had this imaginary pen, and I'd be writing in the air, and she had this imaginary eraser, and she'd be rubbing out my words. So it was obviously something that I was compelled to do, but I never saw it as a profession, to be honest, because I had an innate sense that it was a difficult thing to do for a living. It was, to my mind, just a pleasure that I pursued, and never saw it as a vocation. Then when I went to law school, because I thought, okay, you got to have a real job. And when I graduated from law school, I rewarded myself by taking a year off and moving to Peterborough, Ontario. Other people were going to, backpacking through Europe. I moved to Peterborough, and I wrote a novel. And again, it wasn't a career plan. It was just something that I really wanted to do and find the time to do. And when I was finished, I brought that novel to my agent, and to my surprise, within a week, she had sold the rights in Canada and the US and the UK, and soon after that elsewhere. And so it was a very unanticipated occasion, and it allowed me, that was 13 years ago, and I've been able to write fiction full-time ever since.
Wow. And could you just give us a recap of your book of short stories, and then
Sure.
the books you've written since then?
I was publishing, my first short story was published when I was 21 in the New Quarterly, which is the University of Waterloo's journal. And subsequent to that, I was sending out short stories and getting rejected, and some were accepted in journals. And when I was 28, 29, one of the editors of one of those journals, unbeknownst to me, forwarded some of my stories to an editor at a small book publishing press, and I got a call offering to publish an anthology of my stories. So that book was published by Porcupine's Quill Press, called Kiss Me, and it came out when I was 29. That was 1996. And so 3 years later, I was in the middle of law school at that time, and when I completed law school, I embarked on a novel, and that first novel was published in 1999, that was entitled Lost Girls. So since then, there have been 4 subsequent novels: The Trade Mission, The Wildfire Season, The Killing Circle, and The Guardians. And I've just completed the manuscript for my forthcoming novel, The Demonologist, which will be number 6.
Wow. Well, you say you began by writing short stories. Was the leap to novels a natural move for you, or did you struggle with the transition at all?
For me, I know that short story writers can often hit a wall when it comes to novels. They are a different beast. I find them personally more forgiving. They're shaggier. You can make a few more mistakes, just because you can bury you can have a lousy page 137 in a novel, whereas you can't have a bad page in a short story and have the thing work. It's just a finer form, and so I find novels, if anything, easier to write, where easier is still brain-crushingly difficult. But as I say, it's a more forgiving form, and I think my storytelling voice lends itself better to the long form. I really enjoy plotting, and so building an architecture of plot and of storytelling and of setting up and 3 acts, and that just appeals to my inner engineer.
Great. Many of your protagonists have serious issues, from addiction to ghosts haunting them from their past, sometimes even literally. Where does this come from, and can you comment on it?
I've always found anti-heroes, dark characters appealing, and the idea of having a hero who is essentially a good person who's just trying to do good in a bad world, I find incredibly dull. I prefer someone who has problems that are unresolved that get resolved in surprising ways over the course of the story. In fact, many of the times my characters don't know what their problem even is, or they're mistaken. They think, well, yes, I'm flawed. My problem is this. Oh, no, buddy. You've misdiagnosed yourself. Or as a reader actually said to me recently, she said, in all your books, It's like driving a car at night with the high beams on, and you know, when you come into a curve at night, you strain to see around the corner, but you can't, so you drive faster and faster to see what comes ahead, because you think the truth lies ahead of you, and if the light were only brighter, you'd see it, when in fact, the whole time the thing you're looking for is in the trunk, and you're driving along with it. And I think that was an astute way to describe my characters. They're people who are driving with increasing danger forward, 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 when really there's a body in the trunk.
Well, shifting gears a bit, if you could travel back in time to a point when you were, say, 18 or 19, and knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself?
I think the best advice I would give myself at the age of 18 or 19, as in writerly terms, would be, you know, that rejection is part of this business. I think rejection actually is an integral part of any career in the arts. More so than I think really kind of any other professional form. And you need to not just survive that, to not just kind of pull yourself together and say, you know, I'll try again tomorrow, but to use that. There's actual value and advice and potential redirection in rejection that you can't be blind to. You can't just sort of say, well, you're all wrong. If you didn't love it, then clearly it's your problem, not mine. So I take something out of everything that people tell me, even the negative stuff. I use it because it's all there as a resource, including what seems to be, on the face of it, the negative comment.
So if I decided to write a book today, would you have any advice for me starting out these days right now, aside from the embrace rejection?
Yeah. I would say there's a lot of misdirect actually at the moment about the discussion of e-books and self-publishing and online publishing and the death, as so-called, of conventional publishing. And I think while those developments are inarguably true, they are at the same time, I think, overstated. That is to say, publishing is what it always was. It's about writing the best book you can and allowing its qualities to find its way to a readership. And I don't think you can Facebook or self-publish or tweet your way out of a crappy book. And so the challenge remains writing the best book you can. However, and there's a million ways to do that, obviously, but I don't think the fundamental challenge has changed very much at all. And if anything, my advice would be to someone who's setting out to publish today, who might be thinking, oh, great, the doors have opened up. Anyone can slap their book online and potentially meet with great success, is that you're kidding yourself, and that to hold back, to not allow something to prematurely come to light, to hold on to it and make it the very, very best thing it can be, because you really only get one shot at it. People will say, take another edit at it, I'll read it again later, but really, in truth, it's you only have one shot.
What gets you going on a new project? Are you inspired by the world around you, articles, images, conversations on subways? What actually gets you to put pen to paper, if you will?
For me, an idea for a novel is an amalgam of about 25,000 small ideas, and there's a point at which I kind of feel like I'm full of ideas, and they cohere. And so if I will take notes on anything, matchbook covers. I have always take a notepad with me and will jot sometimes random seeming things down and collect them in a garbage bag. And eventually, it's sort of like doing your taxes. Eventually there comes a point where I spill those ideas, those papers, onto the dining room table and pull what seems to be useful. And I will have some core idea of what I want the next book to be about, and it can be often very elementary. But it starts to grow from other seemingly initially disconnected ideas that cohere or join the spine of the thing. So it's kind of like creating a Frankenstein monster through grave-robbed limbs. Here's an arm, here's an ear, here's a brain, and you stitch it together, and hopefully it comes to life. So it never comes as one idea. It's a bunch of little ones.
Well, have you ever experienced anything akin to the proverbial writer's block and just sort of stalled? And if so, what did you do to overcome it?
I don't believe in writer's block. So that's my advice to people who claim to have it. I suggest that they go to their doctor and get an MRI, and I guarantee you, writer's block will not show up. There has never been an MRI in history that said, oh, there it is, you got writer's block. It's something of your own creation, and therefore it's something you can dismiss. And so a cure for this condition that doesn't exist, I think, is to write. Not to write necessarily the project that you're working on or start a new novel, but just write anything. So a cure is to go out into the world with a notebook and record reality. Don't try to make pretty sentences or a beautiful metaphor. Just record a conversation you overhear on the streetcar. Just describe something simple. If you were a painter, it would be like, just do a still life. Look at that fruit in the bowl and sketch it. And so I find that if you do that, you relieve yourself of the pressures of writing a book. You just write something, and everything starts to come back. It starts to flow, and you realize, oh, I was never blocked. I was just pretending I was because the project seemed too daunting. If you shrink the project, the problem goes away.
I see. What is the most rewarding experience you've had being a professional writer?
That's a great question. There's been a number of rewards. I think the primary reward of being a professional writer is being a professional writer, which is to say, it's the greatest job I could imagine for myself. I get to make stuff up every day for a living. I get to create characters, and I put them into very unusual, often thrilling situations. And so it's a tremendously exciting and unlikely thing to do for a living. So for me, the privilege of making a living at doing this thing I love is by far my proudest accomplishment.
What is the worst experience you've had as a professional writer?
There's been, relatively few. I mean, I suppose, I've children now, so there is a responsibility to them, and so with that, I think there's sometimes days of anxiety that come with realizing I have zero job security. When I hear some other people talk about, we're on strike because we have no job security, I think, buddy, try being a writer. There's no one who's going to bail me out. There's no RSP plan. So there are days when I look at my kids and my family and think, oh God, what's tomorrow going to bring? But aside from that, that doesn't relate to the work, really. It just relates to the reality that I think a lot of people have of just, getting along through midlife with all of its responsibilities.
So in the same vein then, what advice would you give to a burgeoning writer that would better equip them to be able to sustain themselves from only their writing?
Well, I think is pare things down. Make your life as lean as possible. Reduce your expenses, which is probably good advice for anyone. But to get to a bedrock of sustainability where you can look at your budget and say, well, this is what it costs for me to live. And I've gotten rid of everything I really can honestly live without. Well, that's your X number. So I need to make X as a writer, for example, if this is going to work. So give yourself the best chance you have. I mean, I know a lot of people who are, let's say, lawyers today who think, oh, will say to me, I wish I could be a writer, I just can't afford it. And I think, well, get rid of your Porsche and your odds might improve. So yes, I mean, you live like an artist, which is another way of saying as cheaply as possible.
Fair enough. Your novels are all thrillers of one type or another, and the genre typically sits outside the classic types of books that generally populate Canadian literature, yet all 5 are bestsellers. Does this mark a shift in what the public is interested in, or perhaps it never left at all? And do you think you've tapped into something new, or has it always been there?
I think I'm a bit of an oddball in terms of Canadian literature. I don't think there's a number of people who are doing what I do, where what I do is some kind of hybrid of the literary and the commercial fiction. There's crime writers, but I don't really do that either. I don't really have a detective who has to figure out who killed the body on the floor. My stuff is weirder, I suppose, than that, and it isn't really driven by a mystery per se. and yet I'm at the same time interested in literary questions of character and social observation. So I'm a bit of a mutant, but I do think there are, I'm not attributing myself with this, but I think there are more mutants coming along, and I think what Canadian literature is alive to change, and not as quickly as maybe I initially thought it would be when I started out, and maybe not as much as I would hope, but I see change afoot.
Where do you see Canadian literature heading in the coming years?
Well, I think Can Lit continues to be necessarily preoccupied with survival. It's a small market. Even with our relative recent successes, domestically and internationally, it remains a tough market to survive, to publish our own books, and to market them, and to have a readership. Having said that, I think the future looks quite rosy insofar as we have an infrastructure that really works. We have, relatively speaking, government grants that help individual writers, both at the provincial, federal, and in a city like Toronto, and presumably KW, if not at present, but in the future, even at the municipal level. And so that's essential. We have a number of publishers, small, medium, and large, that are quality and do quality work. And we have an infrastructure of booksellers, of the large chain, but as well as indie booksellers and online booksellers that work, that people turn to. So it is I think it's actually, given the size of its market, remarkably successful.
As a writer, when you think of Canada, and even more specifically Waterloo Region, what are some of the descriptors that come to mind?
Sorry, could you ask that again?
As a writer, when you think of Canada, so it's like a two-part question. When you think of Canada, what are some of the sort of descriptive sort of words that come to mind as a writer? And then the second part is, if you think of Waterloo Region, is it the same? Is it different? What are the descriptors that come to mind?
Yeah. Well, I think the tone that has dominated Canadian literature until recently has been typically of a quiet kind, reserved, not necessarily engaged in the contemporary. It often is a literature that looks back, that is concerned with history and making amends, as opposed to being anxious about or excited by the present day. I think that is changing, and I think one of the ways that excite me about that change in relation to, say, a place like Waterloo Region or Stratford, Ontario, where I grew up, is our overlooked places, the growing communities, de facto suburbs. I think those are really, on the face of it, you'd think, well, those aren't interesting places to write about. And I think, on the contrary, those are vastly overlooked, underrepresented locales. And I think it's exciting when writers take on places that seem perhaps staid and fully figured out on the outside, but crack them open in a sort of David Lynchian way, and you see all the interesting life inside.
Waterloo Region has been called the Silicon Valley of Canada. How has modern technology made an impact on your professional work as a novelist and professional writer?
Well, technology, off the page, has impacted my life as a writer insofar as there's a minimum now expectation of participating in communities, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or Goodreads, or they're changing all the time. And there is a sense that, no, you have to be there. You have to make yourself available to your colleagues, to the industry, and to your readership, which are things that I enjoy. I have to push back against it to a degree, because I think, as everyone knows, if you allow it, something like Facebook will take over your life. It's good to be on it, but you won't get anything done if you just do nothing but Facebook. So I think that's the primary way that technology has changed. Writing remains the practice of assembling words and thoughts into sentences, but the apparatus around publishing has changed a lot, and the expectations on the individual writer have increased.
What individual or individuals have had the biggest influence on your career?
I don't really have writerly influences per se. I mean, obviously there's books that I love, and there's writers who I've read and have tried to emulate. But I've never really had a living, hand-holding mentor. I suppose, in ways I have admired and have used as models people who are not necessarily working in the literary world. So I think of someone like Steven Spielberg, a film director, who works in different, tells different stories, but is a master craftsman and someone who's primarily interested in storytelling and who brings together human dramas and character concerns with thrills and suspense and even horror from time to time. I would love to be, in a way, the literary equivalent of a Steven Spielberg, in that each novel / each movie is different, and yet it takes you to a place this is going to be an interesting ride. You're climbing into a Spielberg or Andrew Pyper roller coaster. I don't know where it's going to go, but strap yourself in. This is going to be good.
That's a nice dovetail into the next question, because several of your books have been optioned for the big screen, and Lost Girls will be released in the near future with you as the screenwriter. How does a writer make the move from print novelist into screenwriting and ultimately movie sales?
Well, movies is a very strange world, and it's you never quite know. Let's put it this way: you wouldn't want to base next month's mortgage payment on that option that someone said they're going to pay you for a book. Movies is it's an exciting business because I love movies, and the idea of one of my books being adapted into a movie obviously is a very thrilling prospect. But as I say, don't bank on it. So I kind of, for me, my involvement in the movies, even in adapting my own work, is I still see in a way as a kind of serious flirtation. It's not marriage. It's it's something on the side. It's delightful and exciting, but I need that distance because I think if I put all my eggs in that basket, I would just be setting myself up for disappointment.
What value is an agent to your craft, and how would you suggest a new writer attain one, or is it a case of they'll find you?
In my case, my agent found me. It was a very strange, happy circumstance that she returned from England to Canada and was setting up shop. So she was hungry for clients, and I had published my first book with a small press, and so she sought me out. Unheard of, really, today. It's tough because it's a chicken and egg problem in that you need really an agent to find a mainstream publisher, but finding an agent is almost as hard, if not harder, than finding a publisher. So that is to say, finding a quality agent. So for me, my advice would be to learn as much as you can about who is out there, agent-wise. What kind of books do they represent? Is it the kind of book that you want to write or are writing? And to approach them with the best product or pitch that you can muster, to not waste their time, in other words. And so, in a lot of ways, the most important document to your book in finding a publisher will be the cover letter, something that will never be published. But because an agent is very busy and he or she has very limited time, you have 2 paragraphs to grab them, and if you fail at that, they're never even going to read your book.
That's good advice. In your blog, you've said, "We don't judge anymore, we compare judgments now." Can you explain your take on criticism, and do you think it's true for all media?
Yeah, I think one of the side effects, happy or otherwise, of social media is everyone's a critic now. People used to, go for a drink after a movie and say, "Did you like this or not?" Now they tweet that, and so those remarks become part of this tumbling public cacophony of opinion. And I think it's positive in many ways, but one of the maybe deleterious side effects of that is we can't any longer just meet the cultural product in privacy and experience it. We kind of participate in a conversation even as we come to it, and I think it's made the aesthetic experience of reading a little noisier than it used to be, and sometimes it's useful to turn everything off, literally, before reading something or going to see a film or whatever it is, to just experience it as as it was intended, as a meeting between yourself and the thing.
You've also spoken recently about the first line in books. Can you elaborate a little on your thoughts around the importance or unimportance of the first line?
Well, it's a very impatient time, and publishing is a very impatient industry in that agents, editors, readers have so many choices that you can't dally. And so the first line becomes, and continues to be, increasingly important. How you set the tone, how you can kick things off maybe with a question, with a mystery, with a hint, with a flirtation, with something. And I think a big mistake for novice writers is to think, well, things really pick up around page 70. No one's going to get there. And so maybe it's not so much the first line needs to be absolutely magical, but the first page needs to be. There needs to be something happening. And I think one of the mistakes beginning writers make is the slow build. And that's not to say that you need to have a car crash or have some kind of apocalyptic mayhem on the first page, but simply something must happen, something that gives a reader reason to turn the page.
What is your favorite quote or governing principle about writing?
I think for me, a very useful quote that I return to is by Raymond Chandler, who basically invented the noir novel form, who said, "When in doubt, have a man come into the room holding a gun." And what he meant by that was make something happen. In a scene, if you feel a bit stuck, or in a story or even a novel, if you're feeling like, well, I know I have to get there, I'm not sure how to get there, I'll just take my time, have something happen. And it needn't make sense. The scene may not anticipate someone coming into the room with a gun, but it'll be all the better for its surprise. So again, when in doubt, make something even potentially chaotic happen, and then what you'll find is that the characters respond to that event in interesting ways. It's not the guy with the gun that's interesting, it's how your characters respond to the guy with the gun that will give your story new life.
What does the future hold for Andrew Pyper? What's next, and where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Well, in a perfect world, in 10 years I'll still be alive, and I'll still be doing what I do. And so I'd love to be making more stories. Just starting out on a new novel, and I'm doing that assembly of all the bits and pieces, and hopefully by this summer I'll be launched into it. So for me, the status quo is perfect.
Who's your favorite writer, and what's your favorite book?
I have many favorite writers. I think for me, The Good Soldier by Ford Madox Ford is a near perfect novel. It's deeply ambiguous, it's very strange, it's sad, even though not particularly tragically sad things happen in it. It is a mystery without a dead body, and in a way that's the kind of book I want to write.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. Andrew Pyper is an award-winning and best-selling novelist whose work has been published around the world. We caught up with Andrew at his home in Toronto.
Thanks, Robin.
Bye.